Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Reddit series video from the subreddit HFY called Flintstone Chapter 27 Puzzles, written by some guy named Ted. Gricksax, I hadn't heard my father's name in years. I hadn't seen him since I was 5, to be honest, and I didn't remember much about him except a vague feeling of warmth and safety. Really, the feeling everyone had around their parents. Your father? Bor exclaimed. You mean to tell me your father can do magic? Does that mean that you can? How? Bor, I said slowly. Was Mylak a Jahan? His babbling stopped abruptly as he realized what he was saying. No, he wasn't. I raised my eyebrows at him. They moved weirdly without my eyes to anchor them. Right, my father is a Jahan the same as me, and I'm certain Mylak did not do magic, because there is no such thing. Sorry, I got a little carried away. I don't know what came over me. He could see him. I would have guessed the Bor looked sheepish. His voice certainly sounded it. You've had quite a month, I said. I added dryly. Besides, it's not every day you see someone come back from the dead. He chuckled at that. No, I can't say that I have. The room fell silent as we thought about anything to say. Bo spoke first. What do Bahones have to say about your condition? When are they going to let you out? An itch developed on my thigh. I resisted the urge to scratch it. It's not looking good. I'll heal, but I'll take a while. Getting stomped in by that erg is not the best for your health. You'll be stuck in here for a few months. It could be worse. I'm sure that all the cute nurses that have walked by won't mind keeping you company. What? You haven't noticed that? He trailed off. He had forgotten that I was blind. I suppose I had to get used to that too, and the blind sympathy from beings who had no idea of what I experienced. It's all right, I said. It'll take some time to get used to it too. What were you saying about cute nurses? Well, the last few minutes alone, several rather attractive nurses have walked down the hallway outside your room. They try to act like they aren't, but I know how a female acts when she's trying to hide something. Poor boy, he thought he knew, but what he said was interesting indeed. Oh, it's probably nothing like you think. What happened was that they heard about someone who survived an erg to the chest, and they're just interested in seeing how that's possible. Bor laughed loudly. TEDx, you might know a thing or two about fighting, but females are an entirely different matter. Trust me, he said as his voice grew nearer and softer, evidently leaning in towards me. They don't care that you survived something that should have killed you because of the impossibility of it. They're far more interested in the fact that you fight ergs and survive. You're one of the most famous beings in the rebellion, you know. All bandits are. And you are Clint especially. And to a female mind that makes you very attractive. They've heard stories about you too. Now you've traveled the galaxy, saved hundreds of beings, fought across the stars. Besides, Bor said in a slight tone, it's not like you're in a bad-looking specimen either. I'd say I'm quite bad-looking, but that's just me. I don't know where it came from, but the best way to deal with personal issues was to joke about them. That's what my ex-wife told me, anyway. Bor was silent. Laugh, damn you, I said. I know I'm blind, and I'm going to have to deal with it for the rest of my life. I can joke about it if I want. It took me a moment to realize he actually was laughing, but he was laughing so hard that he was breathless. All I heard was a faint wheezes. After Bor managed to catch his breath, he said a somber voice. I'm gonna miss you, TEDx. It just won't be the same without you and the bandits. Don't talk like that, I told him. Maybe Mylak will come back and magic me some new eyes. That would be great, Bor said. If he can bring you back from the dead, he can cure your blindness. The door opened, clicking against the wall, and I heard a faint pattering across the floor. Sir, said a light, feminine voice, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave now. Mr. Jakku needs his rest. I disagreed. No, I'm fine. He's not bothering me. I'm sure of that, the voice said in an accent that I could not quite place. But you need to rest regardless. You should have been asleep hours ago. But, Bor protested before she cut him off. There'll be No argument. Her voice was firm and commanding. If Clint had been a female, about 150 pounds lighter, based on the voice, I imagine that's what it would have sounded like. Shoo! The best thing you can do is let your friend rest. Ball grumbled under his breath, but he did as he was told. As he made his way out of the room, he called back to me and said, I'll visit as often as I can, but we're shipping out to the far edges, so I don't know when that'll be. The nurse clicked at him, allowing me to recognize her as a Guan. The ball left hurried goodbye. I sensed that she directed her attention to me and said, You need to get some rest. Sleep is the body's best cure for all its ailments. I have a friend who's coming back shortly. I can't sleep until then. She tusked at me. They'll just have to leave a note or come back later. You need to sleep. If I could move, I would wildly be gesturing, trying to convince you that I'm not tired. You are tired. Your body just doesn't know it yet. Here, I'll show you. Just relax and just let your mind drift. Don't think of anything. Just float in the waves of your mind. I sighed and humored her, and I found that I couldn't relax until I mentally closed my eyes. They weren't there, but I still felt the need to close them to relax. Once I did that, I became aware of the deep exhaustion that my body felt. Most of it was covered by pain, but as soon as I started to feel it, the exhaustion swept over my body and I slipped into a deep sleep. When I awoke, I was alone. After a while, a nurse came in to check on me, declaring me healthy as could be expected. Breakfast consisted of some strange mush that sat well in my stomach. It didn't taste half bad either. After I had finished the bowl, the nurse read me a note that Paul and Clint had left behind. It said that they would be away for an unknown amount of time and that they would visit as soon as they could. There was nothing else. I understood that they couldn't leave anything specific in the note, but I still wished that I could have known what they were getting into, if only to give me in my imagination somewhere to go. I'd never really had a chance to test before, but lying in bed with nothing to do is incredibly boring. I wasn't allowed to move more than my hands, nor could I see anything that would provide even a moment's distraction. I took to counting to keep me busy, but that only lasted for an hour by my count. I quickly grew bored of that and began to squeeze my hands together, sometimes in a rhythm, other times at random. I tried to engage the nurse who fed me lunch in conversation, but she could only stay for a few minutes before continuing on her rounds. I heard no one else in the rest of the day. The second day was much the same. I was given meals and brief conversation with the nurse who brought me my food, but there was little to do in the way of occupying my time. I slept, mostly, both because I was tired and because it helped pass the time. On the third day, someone kindly thought to give me a puzzle. It was a strange puzzle, a tube inside of a tube. Etched on the inside of the outer tube was a maze of lines and grooves. A single raised piece on the inner tube fit inside, sliding through the maze. You were meant to solve the maze by rotating and sliding the tubes by touch, because you couldn't actually see the maze. It was perfect for me. It took me an hour to solve the first time, and by the end of the day I could have solved it with one hand in less than 5 minutes. The next day they brought me another, far more difficult puzzle. That one took me a whole day to solve. On the fifth day I had a visitor. A knock came from the door and I ignored it for the initial notice, because usually nurses just knocked to let you know that they were coming in. The knock came again. Turning towards the noise and confusion, I called out, "Come on in." With a whispered sigh, the door glided open. I took note of it because it had never made that sound before. Whoever had opened the door walked over to my bedside with light, purposeful steps. "Hello, TEDx," the voice said. When one describes a voice, one usually notes the tone, the accent, and perhaps the sounds like. Clint, for example, sounded like honey poured over rocks, with the honey optional. Boar, in contrast, sounded like water pouring after a rainstorm. I've tried to describe voices to others before, but almost no one knew what I was talking about. Only other Jahans took note of what the voice sounded like, its subtleties and impression. Some were rich, some were shallow, some flew, some smoldered, Solid as the oak and light as a feather, voices resounded, each unique in its own entity. But each of their voices was simply that, a voice. I could distinguish each, and some stood out to me, but beyond that, a voice did not draw my attention. This one did. With 2 simple words, the world faded away for a brief moment. All that was that voice, high and clear like the air around the peak of a mountain. Lithe and elegant, it danced through my ears, skimming the fingers gracefully across the pool of my mind. Complex and intense, the coursing deep waters of Celestine water. 1,000 different notes or tones a minute faceted, filled the air, vibrating with life. Never before had a voice captured my focus with such utter vigor. I could have not escaped the pull of that siren's call, even if I desired. "Hello, TEDx," the voice came. "My name is Myzali." "Hello," I stammered, and said the first thing that popped into my mind. "You're beautiful." I heard the slight O in surprise. I was ready to kick myself. Was I 15 again? "I'm sorry," I said. "I meant that your voice sounds beautiful. It's the first thing I've enjoyed since being in here." She, and if it was a she, laughed. It wasn't a mocking laugh, just a genuine, mirthful chuckle. I wasn't surprised at the compliment. Your comment just made it seem like you could see me. I laughed with her. No miracles in here yet. Yet? Confident, are we? My chest hurt when I laughed again. Her voice was enchanting, and there was something there that I hadn't heard for a very long time. A Jahan accent. Myzali was a Jahan name, and from my own home world. I was not mistaken. The X in her name gave it away. It was as strange to meet a Jahan out here, in the middle of the Rebellion space. "What can I do for you, Myzali?" "Actually," she said, "it's more what I can do for you. You're going to need physical therapy to get back on your feet, and I'm going to be helping you do that." Bohones mentioned something about that. What exactly does that mean? "Well," she said, her footsteps indicating her stepping closer, "due to you being in a coma and subsequently bedridden, your muscles have atrophied quite a bit. We need to get you used to moving them again and get them back into excellent condition. Then there's the injuries themselves, your chest and shoulder being the main concern." "You mean like lifting weights and mobility exercises?" "Precisely. We won't be starting your therapy for a few days yet, as your injuries have a bit to heal before we can put stress on them. I'm just here to make an initial assessment." If I wanted to, I could have lost myself in her voice for hours. As it was, I was slightly more interested in having a conversation with someone who was just there to check my vitals and feed me. What does the assessment conclude? Essentially, taking note of your current functionality and what might be done to improve it. The sound of fingers tapping on the screen reached my ears. I turned my head towards it, and Myzali must have noticed, because she said, "Just taking note of my initial impressions." The tapping continued. "Where are you from?" I asked. "You're clearly a Jahan, and your accent places you from Zurus." The tapping stopped. "If I had to guess," I elaborated, "I'd say Yazina province." "How did you know that?" she said with bewilderment. I shrugged as best as I could, buried in the blanket and pillows that had given to me. "It's all in your voice. I'm from Zurus Nenix province. That's why I know what someone with a Zurus sounds like." "Is that so?" she said. "Your hearing is quite exceptional. I thought I got rid of my accent years ago." "I have a talent for voices," I said. "I think we can conclude your hearing has not been affected," she said, resuming her tapping. "Were I testing for that, you would have full marks in it." Myzali tapped away for several more minutes. I remained silent and simply listened. A pleasant tingling starting at my scalp, the result of the noise. She stopped tapping, and feeding faded. "For this part, I need you to get a little more hands-on. Do you have any objections?" she asked. I shook my head. "Just be gentle on my chest. It's still a bit fragile, so they tell me." She chuckled at that. "How'd you end up out there?" she asked as she walked around the foot of my bed. "Ugh, well, an erg used me as a stress ball, so there's that." I felt a pause. "An erg?" she asked, a hint of disbelief in her voice. I nodded. Sounds crazy, I know. Who survives an encounter with an erg? You, apparently. What I intended by my question was how'd you end up all the way out here in the Rebellion space if you're from Zorus? Not to put too fine a point in it, but Jahans aren't really known for their prowess in battle. Nor are they known for their medical expertise, I replied. I ended up here by chance, mostly. Met the right people, ended up in the right places at the right times, until recently, as you're able to tell. I suppose you're right, she said. It's just that I've never met another Jahan who did something for others that didn't benefit themselves in some way. We tend to be a selfish bunch, don't we? I felt a light touch on my right shoulder and jerked out a reflex. The sudden movement evident from her was well, because I heard a gasp and a, I'm sorry, I should have warned you first. I waved my hand slightly. It's fine, I lied, sure she could hear my thumping heart over my voice. I just need to test your range of motions and reflexes, she explained. Taking my arm again, she poked and prodded me for a good 10 minutes, moving my limbs and muscles in a variety of directions. I told her what hurts, what didn't, and what was tolerable. Very little didn't hurt, mostly my legs, and most of the rest was tolerable if I ignored it. Judging by Mazala's reactions, it should not have been tolerable. Are you sure that doesn't hurt? She asked, a hint of disbelief undercutting her angelic voice. Not even a little. No, I said, shaking my head, while the finger poked aside was uncomfortable and sore. It was not like the pain in my chest. It's a bit sore, though. Might you stop poking it? Sorry, you're being truthful, not just acting tough for me. I'm sure my chest hurts when I inhale deeply. She snorted. With as many broken ribs as you have, I'm surprised you're not gibbering mess from the breathing. I shrugged as far as I could. After Mountain's tear, everything else is kind of dull. Her prodding stopped. You've taken Mountain's tear. I wouldn't say taken. It was not my choice, believe me. But you've had it. Yes, that would explain a great many things, she said thoughtfully. Her prodding resumed every motion my body was capable of, and some that I had no idea was possible, was tested and recorded. She talked to me during the assessment, explaining what she was doing and why she was doing it. I simply laid back and let her voice wash over me. How did this happen? She asked, gliding her fingers over a missing chunk of my left ear. Plasma shot, I said. You certainly have a wide variety of scars. Are all of them from your time with the Rebellion? No, most of them are actually from before I joined the Rebellion, when I was running around the galaxy. I've never seen such an impressive collection. You'll have to tell me your stories in the future. We continued our conversation until the end of the assessment, and then for many minutes afterwards. Eventually, when the nurse came in to give me my evening meal, my Zali realized the time and excused herself, promising to return the next day. The prospect filled me with joy. Here was something to break the monotony of the day. My Zala was wonderful to converse with. She was intelligent, funny, and a great talker. We had a number of things in common as well, in addition to both being Jahans and places where Jahans had no place being. We'd both come from the same homeworld, held many of the same interests, and we had both joined the Rebellion for very similar reasons. She intrigued me greatly. When I fell asleep that night, it was the anticipation for tomorrow. I awoke at the same time I always did, when the nurse came in for her morning tests and breakfast. We chatted briefly, but our conversation did not pass much beyond the pleasantries. I did learn that Nurse Tijum had done something rather nasty to Nurse W.R.E. in retaliation for sleeping with Tijum's girlfriend, but that was not out of the ordinary for the hospital. Nurses and their petty feuds are the glue that held hospitals to the social scene. I spent the morning fiddling with my puzzle tubes and waiting for my Zalia to stop by. I hadn't been this excited to talk to anyone in about 10 years now. The blame lay squarely on the fact that I hadn't prolonged contact with anyone for a good week. My brain must have been keeping track during my coma as well, subconsciously adding to that count. The morning passed agonizingly slow. I knew that I had no reason to be this enthusiastic about talking to a physical therapist, but I was. I had solved the puzzle twice and was well on my way to a third when the door creaked open. It was slow, light noise as if someone was trying to go unnoticed, but when you can't see, the rest of your senses become better to compensate, and I was never a poor at hearing in the first place. The footsteps crossing the floor were not light, purposeful steps a Myzalia had possessed. These footsteps were heavy, labored if under a great weight. I turned my head towards them, and they stopped. "You're not supposed to be in here," I said. I didn't know if that was true, but it was not far leap. "No, I'm not, but I do need to be here." The voice was male, and it was thunderous. It was not loud, but it filled the room with its presence. The voice sounded almost solid, a physical manifestation of the speaker's thoughts. Seemed to settle on my body, sinking into the fibre of my being. "Why do you need to be here?" I asked. I felt a hand on my shoulder. "My son, there is much I need to tell you." "Move, wrench monkey!" Mulk's rear ducked as a thick pipe flew in his direction. The words weren't in a response for the incoming whirling metal, but rather the pipe or the emphasis for the words. Sadly, that was all too common for the experience of Mulks. Life aboard the King's Grave was not easy for a 15-year-old, forced to labor with the ship's repairmen. Mulks had been a virtual slave for years, ever since the ship had previously been with his parents and sister had been attacked and boarded by the Zephyr and the Dreaded and his pirate crew. Mulks had been surviving by continued goodwill of his captors. They pretended he was one of the crew, that he was the son of many of them, but Mulks knew the truth. He was a slave, and he was expected to do whatever the captain wished. Currently, that meant servicing the boarding pods with old Thekewa. He was a mean bastard. Mulks never moved fast enough or did well enough to earn praise. The only thing he got was respite from the abuse. After ducking the pipe, Mulks returned to work under the engine with the boarding pod. He liked it there. Machines and their inner workings were his escape from his current situation, and he leapt into them with relish. Due to want to escape nearly every moment, Mulks spent most of his waking hours surrounded by machines. He knew them inside and out, and could take them apart and put them back together again blindfolded. They were his solace and his freedom. This particular pod was having issues with fuel and propulsion interconnector. It was a problem Mulks had run into many times to count. While the pods Zathrai employed for the pirate raids were solid machines, they were also old. Old machines didn't run together as well as fresh ones. All their parts replaced at one time or another. Mulks still loved them though. The old ones were the best, each with their own personalities and quirks. Gripping his Omni-tool, Mulks leaned in, bringing the relatively simple process of disconnecting the malfunctioning part. Before he touched the tool to part, the ship shook. The rocketing ship was never a good thing when being intertwined with, seeing as several tons of metal would crush Mulks immediately. "What in the name of bloody goddess was that?" shouted old Thekewa. Mulks realized it hadn't been the ship that he was working on that had rocked. It was the King's Grave that had rocked, all 3,000 feet of her. The lights hanging from the ceilings and embedded in the walls flickered and blinked out. Within seconds, the emergency lights and alarms started to go off. "Are we being boarded?" Mulks asked incredulously. "What was that, wrench monkey? Speak up!" Old Thekewa roared. He had one volume setting. Loud. "Are we being boarded?" Mulks yelled back at the old Thekewa. "Yes, we are," came a calm voice behind Mulks. Turning, Mulks forced to bend his neck sharply to look into the face of the Zephyr the Dreaded. The dread pirate lord was an imposing figure, red-scaled face scarred with battle worn. With a gun slung over his shoulder, Zephyr looked prepared to fight off the regiment of invaders. On his other shoulder, Ray the Slime burbled and bounced. No one knew what exactly Ray was, but from what little the crew could tell, Ray was a sentient slime ball that lived off cracker dust and depleted fuel cores. He couldn't speak or hear anything that they could tell, but the captain seemed to enjoy him. "Thekewa, ready the cannons." "Sir, the cannons, they're not—" Sapphire turned his cold gaze to old Thakawa. The smaller Gurk gulped. He hastened his work. Malks turned to follow, but he was stopped by the captain. "Grab a gun, young Malks. Today you learn how to kill." Malks knew better than to argue with the dread pirate, and grabbed a gun from the nearest work table. There were copious amounts of weaponry scattered about the ship, with many in repair bay for maintenance and upgrades. "Aye, sir. The bastards attacking us have sunk their craft into the upper hangar. You and I are going to—" Whatever dread Sapphire and Malks were going to do was lost in the noise of impact and an enormous mass against the side of the ship. The wall buckled under the force before splitting to reveal the tip of a boarding pod. Malks knocked off his feet and head bounced off the floor. When Malks had forced himself to his feet, a strange scene met his eyes. The pod's spearhead had opened up and several figures had spilled out, filling the room. Sapphire the Dreaded knelt on his knees before the huge being, hands clasped behind his head. This new being was the most terrifying being Malks had ever laid his eyes upon. Over 6 feet tall and rippling with muscle, the being stood with a pistol held to Sapphire's head, face twisted in the purest expression of rage that Malks had witnessed in his life. The eyes blazed with fire, seemingly hot enough to kill with a glance, and the features seemed to carve out of stone, using malice and hatred as a hammer and a chisel. "Did you kill her yourself?" The being hissed at Sapphire. Malks knew that sound of the voice that would burn into his memory for the rest of his life, however long that would be. "What are you talking about?" Sapphire asked. To his credit, not a hint of fear showed in his voice. If Malks had been in his place, he likely would have melted into the floor. The blow that with being to the face of the stone dealt to the dread pirate knocked him straight to the floor so quickly that the sound fist striking flesh striking floor was a continuous noise. Stoneface dragged the pirate lord up by his collar. "Lady Knight, rebellion diplomat on the ship you raided 3 weeks ago. Did you kill her?" Sapphire spit into the stone man's face. "I will not tell you anything." Stepping forward, Malks was immediately met by the barrels of 3 guns, held in the hands of Stone's face's fellow boarders. He froze, his hand shooting into the air faster than his gun fell to the floor. "Don't shoot! I may be able to help you." "Why would you help us? We're boarding your ship." The Horiath with a particularly steady gun hand said. "Because," Malks said, savouring the words as they came out of his mouth, "this piece of scum-sucking crap murdered my family and forced me into virtual slavery. If I can help punish him, I'll gladly do it." "What do you know?" Stoneface barked. Malks half recoiled from the harsh fury, but it wasn't directed at him. Was Lady Knight a Batuni? "Yes. What did you see?" Turning to Sapphire, Malks could not stop but smile from splitting his face. The dread pirate, not so dreadful anymore, saw the expression filling Malks's face and desperately shook his head, trying to keep Malks from saying the words that would end his life. Her ship was boarded, she bid for peace, and Sapphire accepted a temporary truce. When she opened the door to her ship, he shot her. There was a sharp crack filling the room. Glancing to the side, Malks saw that the gun Stoneface had been holding was in several pieces on the ground. He had clenched it so hard that it had snapped. Malks backed away. The look of fury on the man's face made Malks almost wish that he hadn't said anything. "You killed her. You will die." The calm words were at odds at the demented mouth they came from. The look across Sapphire's face was both satisfying and pitiful. Faced with death, the dread pirate at least met the chin raised. With a roar that nearly deafened Malks, Stoneface lifted his fist into the air over Sapphire and brought it crashing down. The resultant blow landed with enough force to send the shards of his skull flying into the air. The fist continued through the body, driving it down into the metal floor, embedding themselves several inches into the solid steel. Malks stared. Stoneface remained crouched over the body for several moments before ripping his gore-soaked hand out of the floor and storming out of the room. Malks blinked. His stomach twisted and whirled away, emptying his stomach against the wall. After emptying his stomach the last 5 meals, Malx felt a hand patting him on the back. Looking up, he saw it belonged to the Herith that had a steady gun hand. It's not every day one gets to witness Glintstone exacting bloody vengeance. He's not usually like this, you understand, but it seems your captain has murdered his close companion, and Clint has a hard time with his temper. Turning, the Herith gave a signal with his hand, and the other boarders fell into position behind him. They had travelled a dozen yards before Malx called out to them. "What am I supposed to do now?" The Herith looked back at him. "Have you heard of the rebellion against the Swerm Empire? We could always use more fighters." Malx shook his head. "I'm not a fighter. I'm a mechanic." "Even better. We need one of those in the bandits. Come with us." Malx considered for a moment. There was nothing else for him in the ship, or anywhere he could go, assuming he managed to get transportation off the king's grave. He jogged up after the Herith. End of chapter. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider subscribing. If you wish to support the author, there is a link to the original story, so pop over there and give him your support. If you wish to support this channel, however, there are a few ways to do so. The best and easiest would be to share this video with other people, as well as liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. All of these things tell the algorithm that this channel is at least vaguely interesting, and that may share it with other people. If you wish to support the channel in some other manner, watching my other videos would also help tremendously. Or, if you really like, there is a link down below to leave a tip, or to join the Patreon. Any and all support is very much appreciated. And I hope that you all have a good one until the next time, and I'll see you then. Cheers.